15th century Portugal. Population, barely 1 million. Ambition, the planet. A kingdom so small its kings could walk across it in a day.
Now, Portugal did not have a large manpower. It wasn't like most empires.
Yet it built an empire so wide the sun refused to clock out. How'd they pull it off?
The Portuguese, as they traveled, had to do something that no one had ever done before. That is, to travel on boats to places that they were not familiar with all of the dangers that came with traveling around the world at that time.
And this very much shaped their ambitions and their capabilities as they began to build a so-called empire.
The Portuguese didn't just sail into the unknown. They charted it, mapped it, monetized it. They were the beta testers of empire. A global franchise powered by wind, spice, and a really ambitious GPS called faith.
Religion was really fundamental because the Portuguese people wanted to do a kind of new Portugal in these places, you know? A kind of overseas Portugal.
So a country the size of a postage stamp tried to rule the world. Bold.
Bold is one word for it. Before Britain, before the Dutch, Lisbon drew the world's first shipping routes, not by conquering continents, but by cornering oceans. Welcome to Lesson 4, Inventing Empire. Reality check. Portugal didn't just build an empire. It built the model. The trading posts, sea routes, and plantation economy that followed became the blueprint other empires upgraded and scaled. For the late arrivals, today we're performing a rhythmic autopsy of a nation that turned ocean control into world control. It all starts on the edge of Europe. A sliver of coastline hanging off Spain where maps once muttered, "Here be dragons." But Portugal looked at that warning and saw a business opportunity. Meet Prince Henry the Navigator, who, fun fact, never navigated anywhere. What he did have was vision and a budget.
Prince Henry the Navigator was long presented as a kind of very enlightened figure who developed Portugal as an oceanic power based on trade.
Think of Henry as the world's first venture capitalist for exploration. His nautical school at Sagres, perched on the windy cliffs of the Algarve, gathered mapmakers, astronomers, mathematicians, and shipwrights. Sagres School presented as a formal institution, but really it was a think tank with better sunsets. Out of Sagres came an innovation that changed the world's wind patterns forever. The caravel. Small, fast, agile. Unlike medieval cogs that relied on tailwinds, the caravel could tack against the breeze.
An understanding of the seasonality of the worlds into which the Portuguese hoped to move became an absolute underpinning of their imperial bureaucracy.
Pair that with the astrolabe, a shiny brass circle that turned stargazing into GPS, and suddenly the Portuguese weren't just sailors. They were data analysts with great tans. By the mid-15th century, Henry's crews had edged down the West African coast inch by inch past the mythic Sea of Darkness.
Portuguese expanded overseas, first into Morocco, then further afield into Africa, and subsequently into the Indian Ocean and to Brazil.
You're telling me the ocean had a schedule?
Northeast in summer, southwest in winter. Once they cracked that, it wasn't, "Will we survive?" It was, "What's our return on investment?"
So if you can predict the monsoon...
You can predict profit. Empire by weather report. When they found new coasts, they didn't just plant flags. They drew lines. In 1494, a line of ink carved the world in two.
The Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal, in a sense, represented the papacy under Pope, I think it's Alexander VI, trying to impose its authority in order to separate out Spanish and Portuguese areas of enterprise.
The treaty handed Portugal everything east of Brazil, and Spain everything west. A divine startup accelerator. By decree, Portugal got half the globe. By practice, they got the shipping routes that made it profitable.
And this revenue was needed not just to power the Portuguese state, but also to pay for its navy in particular, which was the absolute basis of controlling trade.
They reached Cape Bojador in 1434. A milestone that had terrified sailors for centuries. Then Cape Verde in the 1450s. And by 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving there was a way to sail around Africa to India. By the time Vasco da Gama finally reached Calicut in 1498, Portugal had transformed from Europe's quiet western backwater into the API for global trade, plugging Africa, Asia, and Europe into one connected network.
Empire was unfolding on frontiers of control, places in which people were vying for jurisdiction over new lands or unfamiliar sea lanes or new trade routes or conquered peoples.
Portugal didn't just discover new worlds, it taught the world how to be discovered.
So what did they actually build?
A startup. Low overhead, high ambition, no exit plan. They didn't own the continents, they just charged rent on the coastlines. Which brings us to their signature move. Something called thalassocracy, an ocean-ruled network of fortified coastal dots.
The commercial empire of essentially territorial nodes, which for the Portuguese was particularly Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, it was Goa on the west coast of India, it was Malacca on the west coast of Malaya.
They ruled especially in towns, ports, and rarely they went to the interiors.
Each dot was a toll booth with cannons. They didn't conquer countries, they conquered circulation.
But they developed a creative system that played to their strengths of establishing, and this was a paradigm that they established, very, very early on, trading factories on coastlines and fortified trading houses, basically.
Whoever wanted to trade from Africa to Asia had to pass through a Portuguese checkpoint and pay in gold, pepper, or compliance. Welcome to the Estado da India, Lisbon's oversea command and control from the Cape of Good Hope to the Straits of Malacca.
There was an element to which the Portuguese Empire, while commercially based, nevertheless required the violence of naval force.
The Battle of Diu in 1509. The Portuguese under Francisco de Almeida smashed a coalition fleet from Gujarat, the Mamluk Sultanate, with Ottoman guns and forces aligned with the Zamorin of Calicut. The result? Portugal upgraded from suggestions to rules of the sea. After Diu, the Indian Ocean had a new sheriff, and he spoke Portuguese, as the faith part still there.
The missionaries did travel with merchants around the globe, and to a certain degree, it was religious faith that got them onto boats.
They truly believed that more important than having trade and becoming rich, more important than that was to convert local people to Christianity.
Goa sprouted churches and colleges. Malacca mixed catechism with customs.
You can see that in things like the monastery at Belém. You can see it in the way in which the iconography of kings like John V very much combined Christianity with empire.
Soft power met hard currency. Baptism on Sunday, customs duty on Monday.
Certainly both were very, very present in Portuguese imperial endeavors from their earliest days. They did not always coexist peacefully. They often were tremendous conflicts between servants of the crown and servants of the church.
Missionaries softened the landing, cannons guard the harbor, Casa de India sets the prices.
And for a few dazzling decades, it worked. Portugal ran the 16th century version of the oil trade. But monopoly, as always, needs fuel. For Portugal, it wasn't oil.
Was it kindness? Please let it be kindness.
I think it is important to confront the brutality that came along with empire and look at it head on.
Atlantic slavery was very much developed by the Portuguese. First, the major sugar slave economy that they established was in Madeira, and then they spread that model to Brazil, where indeed half of the slaves that were taken from Africa to the New World were in fact taken to Brazil.
Gold, sugar, bodies. The triangular rhythm of early globalization. By the mid-16th century, Portuguese ships had trafficked around 150,000 Africans across the Atlantic. And back in Lisbon, the wealth glittered. Cathedrals tiled with gold leaf, nobles sipping imported chocolate, the city perfumed by nutmeg, its luxury built on lives that never arrived home. Still, the hardware of plunder had side effects.
One of the fundamental paradoxes of empire is you can build it and intend it for one use, and it will be used for other things instead.
Empire didn't just stock warehouses. It laid tracks, strung wires, and leveled ports that outlived the business model. In Brazil, the Estrada Real stitched the Minas Gerais gold fields to Rio de Janeiro and Paraty, built to move bullion under guard. The side effect? The same corridors later carried people, newspapers, ideas, and eventually politics.
Well, I think it's very interesting to look at the extent to which imperialism was both a project in making and a project in dissolution, in unmaking, at the same time.
In Portuguese East Africa, present-day Mozambique, ports and rails locked the colony into a regional web not drawn for Mozambicans. Later, Maputo and Beira grew into cities around docks meant for extraction. After independence, those hubs became national lifelines for food aid, refugees, and commerce. Was any of this designed for the common good? No. But infrastructure is
stubborn. It tends to outlive its authors, and sometimes it changes sides.
Bravo. But small kingdoms don't stay top dog for long on a big ocean.
The Portuguese were extremely limited in what they were able to achieve. They could only exert so much power beyond their realm.
First crack, the Battle of Alcácer Quibir. King Sebastião charges into Morocco and doesn't come back.
He was defeated by the Moroccans in 1578, and the Portuguese Empire in Morocco largely crumbled away, leaving only Tangier.
Second crack, new rivals with better spreadsheets.
The difference was that the Portuguese were fewer than other imperial powers, and they were a weak power. They were not as rich, for example, were the British or the Dutch. They depended much more on others in order to survive.
In 1612, the English East India Company defeats the Portuguese at Solihull. The English East India Company and the Dutch VOC arrive with joint stock capital, deeper convoys, and cheaper freight. Lisbon's paywall starts getting bypassed. Then the choke points crumble.
It lost a lot of its territory. It lost in particular territory to the Dutch. One can think about Malacca in Malaya. And it also lost bases to non-Western powers. It lost Hormuz to the Persians, the Iranians.
Ceylon, 1638 to 1658. The Dutch peel off the Cinnamon Coast fort by fort. And in East Africa, Fort Jesus falls to Omani forces in 1698. The Swahili coast slips away. By the late 17th century, the empire that wrote the ocean's rules is playing by other people's terms. The thalassocracy shrinks to scattered strongholds and stubborn flags. More museum exhibit than monopoly. Forts still stood, cannons still gleamed, but the lanes had new owners. The prices had new setters, and Portugal, first to the party, was now paying the cover charge.
So they built the first global paywall, lost the password, and ended up paying everyone else a subscription.
That's it. 500 years ago, Portugal's power lived in ports, wind, and faith.
The idea of connecting souls around the world is one that surely 17th century individuals thought their missionary efforts were doing.
Today, the hardware's different, but the map looks suspiciously familiar.
I think today empire is still very much something that we all think about. It's a word that is used casually and people don't think about what goes into it.
On paper, Sines is just a small Atlantic port. On the brochures, it's Europe's new hidden jewel of connectivity, a landing zone for submarine cables and hyperscale data centers. Ela-Link stitches Portugal directly to Brazil. New systems like Google's Nuvum plugged Lisbon and Sines into the spine of global data traffic.
These unifying of people through commerce and through the linking of banking systems and diplomatic systems and even soft power networks is something that really makes sense in comparison to that faith embrace that the missionaries undertook.
Half a century ago, this was a coastline. Now it's a junction box for the planet. Once, Lisbon charged rent on ocean trade. Now it hosts the hardware while someone else charges rent on our attention, our clicks, our lives in metadata. Some might argue that Portugal is back to the margins of its own system, on the edges of empire it doesn't fully control, still guarding the gateway, no longer holding the keys.
When we think about the places where the Portuguese had an imperial dominion and were colonized by the Portuguese, like Angola, Brazil, Mozambique, parts of India, etc., you can find still legacies of this present.
For Portugal, Mozambique was once a pit stop on the Spice Highway. Forts on the coast, slave ships in the harbor. Gold and ivory moving one way, guns and cloth the other. Cut to Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique today. Beneath these waters sits some of the largest gas fields in Africa. Projects like Mozambique LNG and Eni's Coral South platform have been sold as a developmental jackpot. Tens of billions in private investment, liquefied gas shipped to Europe and beyond. The Afungi gas complex has been described by some local activists and researchers as less a project than a fortress. Critics say that many local businesses who took out loans to feed, house, and serve workers have watched convoys drive past their towns and straight into the compound, with key contracts and skilled jobs going to outside firms. The companies involved, for their part, point to compensation schemes, local hiring efforts, and future development benefits. But on the ground, many residents say what's grown fastest so far is frustration. Since 2017, Cabo Delgado has faced a violent insurgency that, according to UN agencies and human rights groups, has involved village attacks, killings, and abductions. International organizations estimate that the conflict has displaced more than 1 million people and left thousands dead or missing. Figures the Mozambican government and its partners say they're working to address through security operations and humanitarian support. The link between insurgency and gas is indirect, but the impact is real. The pattern looks uncomfortably familiar. Pipelines, ports, security perimeters, with local needs addressed unevenly or too late. Companies and partner governments, for their part, insist the project will bring long-term jobs, revenue, and development, and point to local content rules and social investment programs as evidence.
Empire works best when it actually doesn't take with it the necessity for territorial control. When you can gain political support, when you can gain commercial benefit, when you can gain a degree of diplomatic control without actually having to put troops on the ground.
Empire sent ships out and wealth in. Now, a quieter kind of colonization runs in reverse. Some critics argue that global capital and mass tourism treat Lisbon itself as the colony, a lifestyle product to be packaged, booked, and flipped. For years, golden visas traded residency rights for investment, much of it poured into real estate. Critics say entire buildings in historic neighborhoods have shifted into investment portfolios and short-term rentals, while long-term tenants face rising rents and shrinking options. The comparison to empire isn't about legal sovereignty, it's about patterns of power. They see a familiar script. Decisions made to maximize external demand, with locals adapting to higher costs, longer commutes, or the decision to leave. Officials and business groups reject the language of colonization, arguing that tourism is vital to Portugal's economy. But listen to the concerns voiced in neighborhood meetings and housing protests, and the echo is hard to miss.
It's a mistake to imagine that somehow we have put the age of empire behind us. We can instead argue that patterns of imperial authority and imperial power are much more durable than people would like to believe.
Every empire begins with faith in its god, its goods, or its genius.
Today, I think we see similar power struggles unfolding, also on frontiers. The frontiers have changed. So I think certainly one of the frontiers of the modern age is the digital world.
Maybe empire was never about geography. Maybe it was a state of mind, a belief that the world exists to be managed.
To learn about the Portuguese Empire or other empires is important to have a critical understanding of the present, in the sense that to understand what to not do, because empires are about hierarchy, difference, excessive morality, intolerance.
So the challenge now isn't to escape empire, it's to stop rebuilding it under new names.
Congratulations, graduate. You've completed the course Empires 101. You've sailed from Lisbon's docks, marched through London's ledgers, crossed Paris's maps, and prayed under Spain's cathedrals. Different empires, same equation. Connection as conquest. Progress with a price. Every bridge built across the world still casts a shadow on someone left behind. This was never just about flags or frontiers. It was about patterns. The urge to organize, extract, and justify. History doesn't end with liberation. It ends when we stop mistaking power for order.
When we stop mistaking speed for progress.
When we start asking who benefits from connection and who pays for it.
I understand.
Empires wrote the first draft of the global story. Now it's time for you to write the next one.